This is the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast with your host, Kevin Murray.
Welcome to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. On this episode, we have a guest that is as dedicated to creating fantasy football content as anyone on the planet. He also has the greatest mustache in the fantasy football industry. He's a contributor for Fantasy Points and Rotoballer from the Great White North, and of course, Dynasty Vipers. It's Matt Donnelly. Welcome to the podcast, my friend.
I am doing great today, and that mustache just I was falling for it. I thought that mustache was real there at first. I'm like,
sure.
Not shaking off. No, look good. So, doing good here. Football season is technically over, but it's not over. I mean, we're in that really interesting part of the fantasy football calendar right now, where there's still plenty of content that needs to go out there. We got our playoff drafts going on. We got those weird Week 18 leagues that are still playing out there. And we got a lot of people transitioning right now to the NFL draft, to Mobile, Alabama there for the Reese's Senior Bowl. I mean, what a wonderful time of the year right now. For commissioners, congratulations. You made it through another season. Hopefully you've got that money all dished out, because I know, as someone who's commissioned more than my fair share of leagues, and you know this as well, there's something about the end of the season where you're like, okay, now I can breathe. Now we're good to go. I got about a week or two to myself before I can start coming up with next year's plan here. So it's a great time of the year, and it's also one of those times that I like to use this time here to reflect more than anything.
Yeah, no, it's a great time of year. Truly, the season is a grind, especially when they add extra weeks to the season, and so fantasy. I mean, it's a journey, and it starts early. So everybody's into content, early or year round. If you're all about that dynasty life, and so yeah, you're right. It's a fun time of year to kind of like, okay, decompress a little bit, enjoy actual like playoff NFL football without having everything on the line. Obviously, you can do some fantasy playoff tournaments and whatnot, but it's a fun time of year. Looking ahead, obviously, so much exciting stuff is ahead on the NFL calendar. So you're right. I think it's a good time of year. Happy to have you here. It's a pleasure to have you here. Obviously, I love everything you've been doing in the industry for quite some time now. Take me back to where it all began. Like, where did your passion for sports originate?
Well, my passion for sports came from growing up in a small town. We didn't have a whole heck of a lot of anything. We have, I think, one stop sign where I come from, no traffic lights. And that stop sign's more of a recommendation than anything. It's basically like an 8-sided yield sign is what we got back home. So there was not a whole heck of a lot. I remember growing up young, and here hockey was the biggest thing. We'd go flood the outdoor rink. The kids would get the local fire truck out there. We'd flood the rink, and that's where we were our whole entire winter, from 8 a.m. when we got up until the street lights came on. And my buddy's mother would call from halfway across town, and everyone knew that was the time to go in. You know what it is. When those street lights come on, when you hear someone's mother, I mean, that was the time to come in. So we always had sports playing an integral role in our lives, whether that was going to the school to play some pickup football, whether that was going to the school to play some basketball, whether that was going on our bikes and biking, good Lord knows where, and doing things we were never supposed to be able to do, going swimming in the creek, everything. Like, sports has always been that passion of mine. It's always been, I'd rather go out there and play some sports than go back and play on the Super Nintendo or the Nintendo or the Atari or whatever people had back then. So for me, it's always been sports. It's always had to do something about it. And where I grew up, we had quite the age-diverse group. It was maybe a handful of kids my age, but if you wanted to play sports, you either played with the kids that were 5-6 years older than you or 5-6 years younger than you. So, of course, you always ended up playing with the kids that were older, which meant you got your licks early. So you always had to learn how to defend yourself. You always learned how to play with a chip on your shoulder to be able to play with these kids all the time. So that's always been my driving force in everything I've ever done, whether it's been playing football growing up, basketball, rugby, hockey, whatever that's been. I've always felt that I've always had to play a level up just to kind of match what I did as a kid growing up. So, yeah, for me, sports has always been the release. It's always been something that you could always afford to do. You didn't have to go out there and buy a $700 PlayStation 5 to fit in. No, all you needed was a pair of runners that didn't have to have cleats on them, and you could go out there and do your thing. So, I mean, sports for me has always been that great equalizer, even though maybe financials have never always been there.
How about who are your favorite teams and players all time?
Well, again, I mentioned this being that kind of the runt of the litter type thing, always having to step up my game. So I really fell in love with the aura of the 70s Raiders. So that's where my passion for sports always became. I became a Montreal Canadiens hockey fan because my dad was a Toronto Maple Leafs fan. And that automatically created that divide in our household, which made me the ultimate Raiders fan, because whenever I could divide and conquer, that's where it was. But I always felt like you were the outcast trying to fit in. So the Raiders, I just gravitated towards that. And as I got older and started understanding the stories of those 70s Raiders teams, the Kenny Stablers, the Lula Memoros, the Jack Tatums, you're like, dude, these are my guys. These are my people here. And I just fell in love with it. And that's been my team ever since. So I never actually got to watch their 70s Raiders play, but the stories and NFL Films has done such a great job basically bolting all this information for generations that you can go back there and you listen to it, tell the stories, and fall in love all over again.
It's awesome. That's great. So what's your biggest loss as a sports fan?
Well, my biggest loss, I mean, as you know, as a Raiders fan, we've had some bad luck in recent years. I mean, the Tuck rule was what, January 19th, 2002, I think is what that was. That was one of the Raiders' best teams. That team, in my opinion, should have won the Super Bowl. There's no doubt about that. And then the following year, we get back to the Super Bowl, only play Gruden there again with Callahan running the exact same offense. So pick your poison there. Which of the two is the more heartbreaking? The Tuck rule that we all know was a fumble, that everyone knows was a fumble. Even Tom Brady knows it was a fumble. Or the fact that we went to the Super Bowl feeling pretty good about ourselves and not changing a damn thing. I mean, neither one of them feels good, even to this day, because we haven't had any kind of measured success since then. That was Derek Carr taking us to the playoffs and then breaking his leg like the week before the playoffs started and then losing to the Houston Texans. So it hasn't been good. Luckily, It has conditioned me for Twitter, right? I mean, being a Raiders fan and suffering for as long as we have, anything that happens on Twitter, you are more than capable of handling at this point.
That's a good point. It's a good point. Yeah, I was in school down in the Bay Area during that time, right there, witnessing all that. So that was that was quite a run of. I mean, what a team they had. And then you're right. The way that it all went down, losing to that that New England team, which I thought at the time was just one of the worst teams to ever advance in the playoffs. So. And then those that Bucks defense and you're right, having Gruden on the other side, knowing everything that's coming, probably didn't help, right?
No, it did not. And the worst part is, like, we're back. I mean, I think it was high school or something. I can't remember exactly, but my buddy was a Bucks fan. It didn't end. It was like a year of hearing it all the time. I know.
So what's your favorite moment as a sports fan? Doesn't have to be Raiders, obviously.
No, I mean, it's hard to find a favorite Raiders moment here in recent years, but I'm going to go back to 1993. I think I was a young buck back then, and my Montreal Canadiens were on an epic Stanley Cup journey and winning more overtime games than any team in NHL history had done. Patrick Waugh was playing lights out. This was the Montreal Canadiens versus Wayne Gretzky and the LA Kings in the Stanley Cup Finals. And I remember this really clear because on June 3rd, 1993, which happened to be my birthday, Eric Desjardins, the defenseman for the Montreal Canadiens, scored a hat trick, including the overtime winner in a 3-2 Canadiens win. I think that was game 2 of the playoffs. So for me, watching that Montreal Canadiens run and having it finish off the nice way, I mean, that was probably the happiest I've ever been, especially as a kid, because you're a kid in Western Canada, out in the Rocky Mountains, cheering for the Montreal Canadiens. There's not very many of us out here doing that. So it's like vindication of all your fandom, just enough to suck me in for life and then suffer through the realities of what was going to be the next 30 years after.
Oh, man. I love it. So when did you discover fantasy sports and fantasy football?
So fantasy football probably came, there's a bunch of us on the football team there in high school, probably around, I want to say 99. I want to say that was probably the year that Steve Berline led the NFL in passing yardage. Stephen Davis, I think, had 17 rushing touchdowns that season. It was a weird season altogether. Your big name players are still doing big time things, but it's one of those things you're like, okay, this is not necessarily the best quarterback, but he's still producing all these fantasy points. Stephen Davis, who wasn't exactly a big name, was scoring these touchdowns and producing in what was fantasy. So we're sitting there, and I found it very intriguing how not necessarily the best players in the NFL were leading your teams to the highest scores each and every week. So that's kind of where we got a bunch of us together there. And you got to remember, this was still probably late 90s. So internet was not really much of a thing, especially up here out in the country here. We were still up on dial-up and and you're like, okay, where are we going to go find any kind of information? Because finding information up here, especially pertaining to fantasy football, it was hard. There wasn't a lot out there. First off, there wasn't a lot out there to begin with as far as what we see now. We see anywhere you turn, you're going to find fantasy football information. But there wasn't a lot of people producing a lot other than those pioneers, those trailblazers, those Paul Charchians, those Bob Harrisons, those Joe Bryants, ML Cadillacs. These guys, they were still putting in Matthew Berry. They were putting the content out there, but it wasn't the way it was today. So you couldn't just simply log on and Google fantasy football. So for me, it was us trying to figure out who the best players were and then pulling out the newspaper and then adding the numbers together for the stats and kind of almost making our own fantasy football league out of that. And then a couple of years later, I think a few of us got into a Yahoo league or ESPN league. I can't remember what it was. It must have been Yahoo, because Yahoo was doing hockey too as well at the same time. So that's kind of where those first few fantasy football leagues kind of came from a bunch of buddies there on the high school football team.
I love it. Now, what do you love most about the game of fantasy football? What is it that drives you towards having that passion that you do?
What drives me is the same thing that drives me insane. It's the unknown. It's the fact that you could have a 99% understanding of what is going to happen, and then you could be 99% wrong just as easily. How many times Justin Jefferson last year's fantasy football championship? This guy's money in the bank. There's no way he's going to get shut down. Boom, nothing. Absolute heartbreak. And I think that's why we love sports, because anything can happen. And with fantasy football, it's the same thing. Anything can happen. So we do our best in this industry of trying a predictive analysis of what is going to happen. But that does not necessarily mean it's going to happen. There's still going to be that human element in everything that takes place as far as fantasy is concerned. It's out of my hands. It's out of your hands. I tell my kids this when I coach football, basketball, hockey. You have control of two things: your attitude and your effort. Outside of that, you have control over nothing else. That's the same with fantasy football. Control your attitude, good or bad. This is what's going to happen. Control your effort. Put the research in. Do this. But it doesn't necessarily mean the effort you're putting in is going to necessarily come with the results that you want. And that's where that attitude kind of back and forth. So for me, that's why I love fantasy sports, because it's still so much predicted on the actual game itself, and there's no real control that you have. You're basically like fantasy weathermen at this point.
There you go. That's true. Yeah, it's that thrill of the unknown that really keeps you at the edge of your seat and fuels like engagement in a fantasy league. All the hype and the excitement and the trash talk. Do you have a primary fantasy league like that you call your home league?
For me, it's really been the Kings Classic in the recent years. There, getting that industry type thing there, and that's been leading to some heartbreak the last few seasons as well. I mean, we've been close, but we haven't been able to bring home the championship belt here in the last 5-6 years. Bob Long has done a great job of putting that together over at the Expo there every year, and that thing just keeps growing and growing, and including more and more leagues. We got the Women of Fantasy Football there, got their league going on there. We've got IDP leagues. We've got the draft night. I mean, this thing is huge. But as far as the Kings Classic is concerned, there'd be nothing I would enjoy more than bringing home a championship belt or two, because it's so difficult in these type of leagues with so many great minds that think so similar whether it's the auction or the snake draft, there's no values to be had. So you really have to cross your T's and dot your I's to even have a sniff of it. And to make the playoffs in both leagues, it is surprisingly difficult to be able to do that because of how great these other minds are. So for me, that is where I like to go and kind of test my ilk, so to speak, each and every year and go out there. Now, Scott Fishbowl is a great one too because there's so much unknown that can happen. All it takes is one fan to get in the league and grab a Barkley in the first round to throw the entire draft up in arms, right? I mean, that's the one great thing when you have experts and fans and finalists and throwing it together because there's so much of an unknown. Whereas when you get in an expert league, you can pretty much predict how the draft is going to go. Like I could probably sit there and do an entire draft by myself and then auction off different teams and each owner would probably be pretty happy with the roster that they got. But I mean, just adding the whole fan dynamic to it changes it. Now for me, I love adding a little bit of IDP to my leagues. I think IDP is a great equalizer. You can't just have a Lamar Jackson 50-point night and have him absolutely crush your team if you have an IDP aspect to it because your IDP can kind of make up for that. They can kind of counteract it. So for me, I do like having IDP in my leagues. The more, the better. But I get it. IDP is kind of niche out there. It's not for everybody, but I love it. I absolutely love it because I think the benefit of having IDP in your league, it allows you to be a much better manager, a much more knowledgeable fan because you're learning both sides of the ball and how they kind of work with one another. And then you can get crazy into the analytics here. And hey, this defense likes to run a cover two. So that means this wide receiver who's had more success versus cover two versus cover one. And it just changes your whole mindset going into those type of leagues.
Yeah, no, IDP is definitely a different world, and it really changes your game, the game of fantasy for sure. And as for the Kings Classic, I mean, what an ultimate test. Now, do you have a one person that you would consider your biggest rival in the league that you compete with, or someone that like when if you lose to them, it hurts the most, someone who you defeat and it's the most thrilling?
You know what? I hate losing more than I like winning. And it's been that mantra my entire life. And it doesn't matter who it is. I just hate losing. It could be anybody out there. The good thing about the Kings Classic, everyone's a good guy. So it's really hard to have that deep hatred, rivalry with anybody in there because everyone's there for the same cause, the same purpose and whatnot. Now, there are certain people that I get in some other industry leagues around with that it's like it feels a little bit better to beat them. But, I mean, for the most part, I take just about every loss quite personally. I really do. It really stings no matter who it happens to be, especially if it's one of those leagues where you, like, put up second highest fantasy points that week and you lose. And then you're like, I would have beat 11 other teams, but I lose this one game. But for me, every loss is just it's the worst loss. I hate it. I hate losing. I really, really do.
I love it. Now, when it comes to fantasy and playing the game, are there certain settings that you love to play with? Aside from like IDP and obviously you love Dynasty, but like specific settings that really fuel your leagues?
I like to get into different types of leagues with different types of settings. And I don't know if there's one that are like, yeah, I need to have it to be super flex. I need two quarterbacks. I don't know if I need that, but I love how they get into these different leagues. And some of these commissioners out there are brilliant. And they change, like John Bosch, he always changes everything in every one of his leagues. So not all of his leagues are similar. So you're like, now you have to go back and you got to look back on the score and see how it actually pertains to how your lineup is set up. And I love that aspect where every league has something different about it. And you have to kind of make your adjustments on the fly and kind of figure out how you want to attack certain leagues. And I just love the fact that not everything has to be the same. I'm not a stickler. I'm not one of those guys that goes, I'll sign up for a league and not even know what the rules are half the time. And then once I get in there, I'm like, oh, I better actually check out and see what the scoring system is and then kind of work my way back there. So there's not one of those things like, oh, no, you got kickers in your league? Yeah, I'm out. I don't want nothing to do with kickers. No, put kickers in there. Give them extra bonus points for further kicks. I mean, I think it's all interesting when you add these. Like I said, the one thing I love about fantasy football is as much as we try to predict it, you can't predict it. You can't predict a kicker going out there and kicking 4 40-yard field goals. You just can't. So for me, you add that element to it and changes the whole dynamic of what could potentially happen. So there's nothing really in any kind of scoring system that I'm like, yeah, that's the scoring system I want. That's something I'm avoiding altogether. No, bring it all on. It's all good.
I like that. I mean, it's true. I prefer a variety of leagues, kind of keeping you on your toes. And it is funny when those commissioners, those pathological commissioners that are just twisted and always wanting to do something new, they'll definitely keep you on your toes. So it's fun to be in leagues that are creative, as well as having, some leagues that are, more traditional too. So I agree with you on that sense. Now, when did you start creating content? Like what inspired that?
So this is probably one of my favorite stories about my fantasy football journey in general. And some people kind of give me a little raised eyebrow about it, but I am a very, very petty individual. And I make no qualms about it. I mean, like I said, I take things personally. I hate losing. I've always kind of grown up with that little bit of chip on my shoulder, but it all started back in Scott Fishbowl 7. And I believe that's what it was. I've been playing fantasy football. I've been watching football. I've been playing football a good portion of my life. I know ball, at least as much as a casual fan. Now, and it's not quite up there with an actual pro player. Let's be honest. When you sit back and you listen to someone like Austin Eckler talking about fantasy football, it's not the same as you and I talking fantasy football. They've got a different insight into the game at a different level. But I've always thought that I know this game pretty well. And I remember sitting there off Fishbowl 7, and I had to sign up as a fan. And I seen Matt Donnelly fan. And I was cool with that at first. And then I got into my league and I seen some of these other people where it's like John Doe, fantasy such and such. I'm like, okay, who's this guy? I don't know who this guy is. I've never seen him, never heard of him. Go look at his work, and I'm like, okay, this is what okay, all right. Then I go look at another guy, and they kind of stole. I'm like, that's it. No, so I call up my buddy here in Canada, and I'm like, you know that time we've always talked about starting our own football site? Let's do it. He's like, are you sure? I was like, yeah, I'm done. I'm not a fan. I can't be a fan anymore. I just can't be a fan. So we started up the Dynasty Vipers. One thing led to another. Hey, Scott, I'm not a fan anymore. I'm an analyst. Can I change my thing? He goes, absolutely change it. Like, perfect. So about 3 weeks into Scott Fishbowl 7, I went from Matt Donnelly fan to Matt Donnelly Dynasty Vipers. I changed that right there. So that's what it was. But it all was born out of pettiness, because one of the things I do on my podcast we do is Behind the Grind, and I always ask everybody, what's one piece of advice? And one of the things that comes up more often than not is just do it. Do it. Get out there and do it. And at that point there, when I see myself as a fan and I seen some of the other analysts out there, it wasn't to knock the other analysts, but it was just more of a, hey, you are there. You can do this. Why aren't you doing it? And if you don't do it, you got nobody to blame but yourself for not doing it. So it was like, hey, Nike, sorry, I'm going to do it. And we went out there and we fired it up, and it wasn't pretty. It was 2 40-plus-year-old dudes trying to figure out how to start a website. Now, I don't know about y'all, but we don't have a whole lot of tech up here where I'm from, and we definitely didn't take a lot of information processing classes or coding classes. Or I make ice for a living. I watch water freeze. That's what I get paid for, and then I drive a Zamboni on it. That's where my knowledge comes from. It's not how to build a Wix website or GoDaddy website or all these other types of things of building these websites. So we built this website without knowing how to build a website. And I mean, that was quite the eye opener in itself, trying to figure itself out. We did it. We got it up there, and we got it up and running, and this and that. And then obviously things have changed, and then more video and stuff, and more to YouTube transition. But yeah, that's basically how it all started for the Dynasty Vipers, was me being a petty individual. And like I said, I'll admit it. I got no problem with that. And that's just how that started.
That's cool. I love it. It's competition. You're competitive. I love it. Got to respect that. Now, what have you enjoyed most about this journey with Dynasty Vipers?
It's the relationship building. It really is. I mean, I'm still blown away today by those who I talk to on a regular basis, the DMs, the phone calls, the text messages. Like I remember even some of the shows that I've done on the Behind the Grind podcast, the interviews that we've had on there, the former players, the big names in the industry, it's still kind of humbling to me to have people be like, yeah, I'll come on your show. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I'm like, really? You do know it's who I am, right? Like, I'm nobody. And I think that's one of the biggest things I can speak for myself is I still deal with that imposter syndrome where I don't necessarily believe I belong where I am. But if I look at the Twitter following, the group of people that have embraced me and everything, it really is a who's who of the fantasy industry. And I think that's the one great thing about it is no one really puts you off. Everyone accepts you from the biggest name to the smallest name. It's really quite inclusive for the most part there. Now there's some ugliness that comes with it from Twitter and whatnot. But for me, I felt included since day one, and maybe the following isn't quite there as far as the big 200,000 followers, 10,000 followers, or this and that. But I do know that those who follow myself and my journey are the same people that I respect in the industry, which is one of the craziest things in my mind is like, okay, all these big names have some kind of respect or something for me, and I really haven't accomplished what I want to accomplish in this industry yet. So that's telling you that kind of maybe I'm doing something right. Maybe there's something I'm doing right. I haven't quite figured out what it is, but maybe. I mean, so for me, it is that networking. It's the whole fact that you've built these relationships. You go to Canton for the Fantasy Football Expo, people know your mustache. Maybe not your name, but they know your mustache. And you're like, okay, I can work with this. So it really is. That's probably the biggest thing for me when we look at this whole big picture.
That's awesome. Now, what as an independent brand, like what have been your biggest challenges along the way?
It really is just competing with the big brands out there. It really is. You're not going to do a whole lot of content that's not already out there. It's really hard to find that one brand of content that nobody else is doing because everyone's doing something. With as much content creation that's going on, it is difficult to set yourself apart, especially as that small brand, because you don't have that reach. Say the Dynasty Vipers have 5,000 followers on Twitter. That's not going to compete with an NFL fantasy. That's not going to compete with a CBS or a Football Guys or whatever it is. So the brand recognition is something that you're always going to be battling. Fantasy Football Unlimited, they probably have the same thing. I know one of the things you have on the one website is all these different brands, and I think that's a fantastic thing out there to kind of recognize the smaller brands out there. But that's one of those challenges that it's always going to be hard for those smaller brands to kind of compete with the big ones. But the thing I do love about the small brand is you can do what you want, when you want, how you want to do it. And that's why the Vipers exist, because I get busy. I have, 11 kids right now. I'd have to do a head count and figure out what we actually have right now. But like I said, my wife and I, we've been fostering for 17, 20 years, somewhere in that ballpark. We've had over 100 and some kids come through our house and home. We have our own 8 kids plus the foster kids that live with us right now. So it's always busy. And there's always something going on, whether it's coaching football, coaching hockey, going to skating, whatever it is. So it's nice to kind of be able to pick your schedule and do it when you want, create content when you want. And for me, most of the time, it's at midnight. I mean, when everyone's in bed and no one else is going on, that's not necessarily how it works other places because there are deadlines out there. So that's the one good thing about having a small brand is you control when and how that content goes out there, as opposed to a bigger brand when there are specific requirements in what content goes out and when and how it goes out.
Sure. Now talk to me about your contributions with BetSperts and Rotoballer and Fantasy Points. How do those come about, and what has that experience been like for you?
It's been great. I mean, Fantasy Points, I've been with them for a few years now, and they're family. I mean, I got to meet a bunch of those guys, Tom and Joe and John and Graham, when they came out to the Fantasy Football Expo 2 years ago. And I do not like to associate myself with brands that I don't respect. And those guys, I have nothing but love for it. I mean, they've made me feel like family since day one. And for me, that's the most important part of it all, because really you could go and create wherever you wanted to. But for me, if I find a place that I feel welcomed that's where I want to be. I mean, it's really that simple. I don't care about the money and all this other stuff that kind of comes with it there. I love that sense of family because it's hard to find that anywhere. And Fantasy Points has done that. I love those guys over there. Rotoballer, they've embraced me as well and given me a lot of opportunities and a lot of freedom to work with my starts and sits videos in each every week. And it's the same thing. And so working with those two brands has been absolutely fantastic. I love all those guys. I mean, I wouldn't trade any of that for anything right now because I appreciate having those guys and being able to talk to them and text them and all this other stuff. It's stuff that you just can't put a price tag on. You can't put it has so much meaning to it that you just really can't put a true value on it. So working with those companies has been fantastic. And BetSports has been fine too because they've just been like, hey, whatever you want to put on your YouTube channel, you just kind of put that link onto here. We'll promote it. And we get some content here. You get your views over there. So it's been kind of one of those mutual type things where, hey, we're not asking for much content, but whatever content you have, put it on here and then we'll promote it. So it's been like a cross promotion of my Vipers YouTube channel, as well as BetSports, people being able to go to BetSports there and finding additional content or whatever kind of crazy ideas I come up with. So, I mean, I love the fact I feel that every brand I've associated with has been beneficial, not only to me, but I like to think I've been beneficial to them as well. I mean, I like to think that the content I've created has been stuff. I mean, they still keep me around, so obviously I'm doing something okay over there.
For sure. And then let's talk a little bit more about the fantasy community. Obviously, you've been to the expo. What's that experience been like for you? What's your favorite part or aspect of the Fantasy Football Expo?
Well, first off, the first time I went there, it was, hey, I know you with mustache. So the mustache, the first thing is like, okay, well, this is never getting shaved ever again. But it is catching up with all these people that you converse with over the course of the year. I mean, that first year was something. I mean, that first year was definitely interesting because the COVID year that we made it down, I somehow crossed international borders to get down there, which was, I don't know how I did that, but I managed one way or the other. But it's these people that shared countless hours with on the internet. And then you get an opportunity to meet them in person. Now, doing streams and Zooms and stuff, that's one thing. I mean, you get a little bit of an idea of who a person is. You don't really get to know a person until you get to know that person. And I do develop a pretty good idea of who I'm talking to when we do these stream years. But when we got down to Canton and you see people in their own element, I mean, I think that changed everything and how you see them. And for me, that's kind of the biggest thing about it, just being able to get there. And the hardest thing is trying to get to everybody because you don't want to leave anybody out. You want to get to everybody, and everybody's trying to get to everybody else. I mean, it really is. It's crazy down there. I mean, it's definitely one of those things I do plan for each and every year. I've already gotten waiting for the seat sales to kind of come down a little bit right now to head on down. But for me, that's what it is. It's about getting to meet someone in person that you've been talking to for so long, and it just kind of changes that dynamic of that relationship.
Yeah, truly a special event. That's, the Fantasy Football Expo takes place in Canton, Ohio every August. Everybody in the fantasy community seems to flock there. It's an amazing experience. Definitely something I highly recommend, and it's always fun to see you there too. So highly recommended. Can't wait till the next one. Every time you leave the expo that you're at, you're looking forward to the next one. So definitely highly recommended. Let's dive into some rapid fire questions. I'll just throw out some questions. You throw out some answers just that come to mind so we can just get to know you a little bit better. So what do you love most about what you're doing in the industry right now?
That's a very good question. What do I love most about what I'm doing in the industry right now? I like to think that one of the things I'm doing well is I'm running a Discord channel there for both Fantasy Points and at Rotoballer, and it's the questions you get. And I've built a lot of a community there in both those Discords, and there's a lot of questions that come throughout the week. I bet you I spend, I want to say about 25 to 30 hours a week just in Discord answering questions nonstop. And it does kind of get to you a little bit. I mean, it's a lot of questions. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. I mean, I'm laying in bed late at night answering questions from strangers. I was like, who are you texting? State Farm. I mean, it is just kind of one of those things. You're like, okay, here we go. And then at the end of the season, the reward is there. You have all these different people. Hey, Matt, thanks a lot for this. I want to put on my 3 championships or this and that. I didn't expect anyone to be, hey, thanks for this, thanks for that. But at the end of the year, all these thank yous came through. I was like, okay, wow. I wasn't doing it for the thanks, but I was trying to build this brand to a certain degree. But it really does kind of floor you when people are out there appreciating the advice that you get out there. Because you know what it's like. Sometimes you go out there and you give someone some advice and it's the wrong piece of advice that week, and they'll let you know that it cost them X amount of this and that.
Yeah.
But and don't get me wrong, there's been some advice that maybe not been the best. I mean, I was wrong. The process, I believe, is right. And it's one of those things I always go through. I think the process that I go through when I do my starts and sits is correct. Now, the process doesn't always equate to production, and that's something that we know. But at the end of the year, I mean, that's probably the one thing that I love rapid fire, by the way, if you can't tell. That's probably one thing I love the most is that they're thankful for the advice that you were giving them, because I think people understand that your time has a value to it as well. And even though you don't necessarily put a price on that time, people are thankful for it. And I didn't really expect that at the end of the season to come the way it did. And I'm thankful that people are appreciative of that kind of time and advice.
Yeah, it's a nice reward after all the hard work for sure. Now, name a person in the industry that you'd like to watch a game with just to get their insight and perspective on the game of football.
So this is a trick one because I don't like to be bothered while I'm watching football. I mean, you know what I mean? It's
yeah.
It's like, watching football. Watch the game. Focus on the game. But I think if we're looking at someone from the industry to watch the game with, I think it would be someone like an Austin Eckler, someone who's playing the game, someone who understands the game. We understand the game from a fantasy perspective, and that's not necessarily the same way that someone like an Austin Eckler is going to look at the game. He's looking at it from not only a player's perspective, but with a fantasy lens on that perspective. And I think that kind of changes how we would look at it. We were able to sit there for someone who not only plays fantasy football, but plays the game itself. And I think that would be an interesting thing. It wouldn't necessarily be an Austin Eckler, but anyone who's played at that high level, Maurice Jones-Drew, someone like that who's playing fantasy football, but also has played the game. And I think that would be kind of a fun thing to do.
That's a good answer. What are your favorite hobbies and activities outside of fantasy sports?
Well, I mean, collecting Funko Pops is right up there, but it's coaching. It really is. It doesn't matter what the sport is. I've coached males, I've coached females, I've coached rugby, basketball, hockey, pretty much you name it. I've coached it at some point. And it's just that mentoring that young person. It's taking a young mind and kind of creating something a greater. And when we coach, we don't just coach for the game. We coach these kids to be better people when they come out of it and when it's all said and done. So it really is one of those things. And then 15 years later, you get to see someone come through. So I've had people come to me 10, 15 years later, go, hey, Coach Donnelly, how you doing? Yeah, this and this. This is what I'm doing. This is my wife. These are my kids. You're like, okay, good. You've not only created this man or woman from a little child, but I mean, that's kind of the thing I love doing. I love coaching, mentoring, and then seeing it actually pay off down the road where they become a good person. They've taken some of the lessons that you've taught in the game. And that's the one good thing about sports, whether it's hockey, football, whatnot. Any lesson that you've learned can be also translated into real life as well. And if you're a good coach, you're able to relay that message and kind of correlate the two.
That's good. That's good. That's really good. I can see where the reward from that would really, really be powerful and hit you. What's your favorite TV show of all time?
I'm a Brooklyn Nine-Nine guy. I mean, I really wish they would have done some sort of movie or kept it going, but I watched that thing from start to finish probably 20 times. It's just one of those things that every time I watch it, I kind of find it funny. I don't know why. I got a weird sense of humor, so that probably pays off big time when it comes down to that. But when it comes to that's really the only show that I can get into and watch start to finish. I've never found another show where I can watch season one all the way to the end and then go back and watch it again. I just can't find Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I could start it, I could finish it, and then I can restart it like right after the last episode. I don't know what it is, but that's that show that does it for me.
I love it. I love it. What's your favorite all-time movie?
My favorite all-time movie is Tombstone. I love how Val Kilmer crushed Doc Holliday. That's got to be my favorite one all time. Anytime I'm flipping through the TV channels, if that show pops up on Stars or HBO or whatever it is, it's automatically going to get watched. And I feel bad for some like Wyatt Earp that came the same year, because no one even talks about Wyatt Earp because of Tombstone and how good that actually was. So for me, it's definitely Tombstone.
Yeah, it's definitely one of my favorites all time too. It's the most one of the most quotable movies ever. Like, you could watch that movie and you know every single line. I love it. I love it. How about a favorite sports movie?
Favorite sports movie? Oh boy, I've always been partial. I mean, growing up in Canada, it's always been Slapshot. That's always been that rite of passage for any kid up here, until you realize how inappropriate it actually is. So, sorry, I know we're in rapid fire here, but I remember watching this as a kid and thinking there was nothing wrong with it. And then I was like, you know what? My kids are playing hockey. I should let my kids watch it. But before I let my kids watch it, I'm a mature adult here. I do some good parenting. I'm going to watch this movie again, because I don't know about you, but I've watched a lot of 80s movies like Coming to America that you forget certain things that are in the movie that no child is supposed to be seeing. So I'm like, all right, I'm going to watch Slapshot. And within like 5 minutes, I'm like, nope. Wife would kill me if the kids ever saw this. I'm like, I can't believe I watched this at the age I watched it at. And there's no way my kids are going to watch this until they're 18 plus years old.
Yeah, the 80s are they'll sneak up on you for sure. Those movies were unique, and a lot of great ones too.
I don't remember half, like Lethal Weapon and this other stuff. You're like, whoa. I don't remember that being there.
Yeah, I guess it just went over our heads, but yeah, you go back, you're like, wow, that wouldn't fit in today's world. But great movies. I love that. I love those Hanson brothers. I wasn't, I'm from Seattle. Wasn't big into hockey growing up because it wasn't around, right? But I loved Slapshot. I love those Hanson brothers, and that's a good one. I love it. But now we got the Kraken, so hey, you bring on hockey. I love it. What's your Super Bowl prediction? Who's going and who's winning?
I mean, it's really hard to bet against the Ravens and the 49ers right now, right? I mean, I think we had a little bit of a Super Bowl preview between those two teams. I'm not sure the Ravens handled the 49ers the same way they handled them in the regular season. I think it's going to be a good game that way, but I kind of want something crazy to happen, because something always happens that's okay, here we go. This just changes things a little bit. I'm not sure what that's going to be yet. We're still waiting for that playoff picture to kind of shake itself out right now. But I think Cleveland Browns are that team. They're the last team to knock off the Ravens. And Joe Flacco, dare I say it, he's been elite since coming back. I mean, who is there another quarterback that you can relate to more than Joe Flacco? I mean, he's playing Sunday Night Football and Monday Night Football, and in the fourth quarter, he needs to take a nap because it's too late. I'm like, I don't know about you, but I totally related.
Yeah.
Totally related to that. I was like, how many times have I just about dozed off during Thursday Night Football? So, Joe, hey, I get it, man. Thursday Night Football has put me to sleep a couple times. I get it. So I think the Browns are that team that could definitely knock off the Baltimore Ravens, and they're the 5 seed, so there's a chance that is a second round matchup that could go down there. And the Ravens are resting players this week. They got a bye week next week. They could be going into the matchup with the Cleveland Browns cold. So I mean, that could be one of those games where you're like, hey, this is a trap. Like, if you're playing those playoff leagues, I might be thinking about playing my Baltimore Ravens that week, because you may not be able to play them again after that.
Yeah, that would be a wild story. It'd be a fun story for sure. I agree. I mean, Niners and Baltimore probably looking like the best, and I also agree that, I mean, the ball bounced a certain way during that game. Baltimore ran away with it. I feel like that will fuel the Niners to be on top of things going through. So they're gonna be hard to beat. But man, something fun in the AFC like that would be great. So go Browns. I love it.
And don't count out the Rams on the NFC, man. They're playing some good ball. Matthew Stafford's out there chucking. He's got two guys there, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, that can catch the ball. Kieran Williams, man, all he did was run for the second most rushing yards while missing 4 or 5 games this season. So, and they got some dude named Aaron Donald, and they lead the league in interior pass rush. So, I mean, they may be a 6 seed, maybe even a 7 seed, but I mean, that's a team I'd be kind of, I wouldn't want to play them in the first round. Same with the Buffalo Bills. Those are teams I don't want to play in the first round of the playoffs.
There you go. Well, obviously 2023, the fantasy season is wrapped up. Hopefully you're not playing in week 18, someone out there. What are your biggest disappointments in 2023? Who are the players that you thought that, were supposed to come through for you, but just didn't?
Yeah, no, Miles Sanders, he's on my hate list right now. He was a guy that I was very high on. I thought he had top 12 running back potential heading into the season. There's a tweet, Fantasy Receipts. Congratulations, you got me on that one. They brought it back. I actually like Fantasy Receipts because I say some stupid things out there that even I forget that I said. And for someone to actually find the time to go back, I respect that. And so thank you. Like, I don't even go back. Once I say something, it's out there, it's done. I don't delete anything. Yeah. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And they brought this up and they put out Miles Sanders. I kind of hyped him up there a little bit. I still agree with the process. I talked about the whole process there. And you know what? Chuba Hubbard played well. So kind of proved that the process was correct. Just the wrong player in this situation. But he was the guy that absolutely killed me this year because I really did believe he had RB1 potential, and it never got off the field there to get going. Between injuries and ineffectiveness, it wasn't meant to happen.
I thought he was going to have a good season too. I mean, they ran the ball great in 2022, and I just thought, he's still young, fresh enough that he would have done something this year. But yeah, you're right, he didn't. Who are you excited to just jump ahead of ADP in 2024 and select in drafts? Like, are there players right now that you just can't wait to acquire?
So I've got my guys. Christian Kirk, he's going to be one of those guys I jump ahead again this year. But it's Nico Collins, man. I love Nico Collins. I called his breakout at the start of the season, so he made me look good about that. You can pull up those receipts too if you'd like. And I did some videos on him, talking about him. And I did mention, like, at the beginning of the season, the Houston Texans offense, it might not be world beaters out there, but they're going to be sneaky good. I didn't think they were going to be this good, this prolific. And I think this team, this offense has so much more room to grow. Tank Dell is only going to make Nico Collins better. Nico Collins is only going to make Tank Dell better. CJ Stroud is going to make everybody better, whether it's Dameon Pierce, Devin Singletary, John Michie. We haven't even tapped into his potential yet. So this Texans offense is an offense I want to get a piece of. And Nico Collins is that guy for me. Especially, he's going to be underrated again next year. So we're going to forget about everything that he did this year. We're going to forget about the 70, 80 catches, the 1,100 yards. We're just going to forget about that because that's what we do. We forget about players that don't fit our narrative that had very good seasons. I mean, that's just typically what we do. And then we're going to think about players that maybe underperformed that we really like, and we're going to boost them back up our rankings there a little bit. So for me, it's Nico Collins. I think you're going to get value on him next year. I would be shocked if he was not a top 15 wide receiver again next season.
It's a great call. And yeah, you're right. I mean, the Texans, what a great story for 2023. I mean, they've obviously just transformed their culture down there. It's impressive to see, obviously the quarterback has been special and those receivers are definitely weapons. So I love it. I think that the sky is the limit for Nico Collins. That's great. Now, obviously it is, we're entering that off season, but in Dynasty, it's just a different beast. What's your process in the off season, or how do you attack the off season? What's your favorite part of the off season? How do you approach the off season from your Dynasty perspective?
The off season is when I get busy. I mean, that is probably the busiest I ever get. For one, we start up our own little podcast there. We go back to the behind the grind, talk to the biggest names in the industry, biggest players, biggest whatever we can get in there. We talk about their journeys. So that's scheduling that. And while I'm scheduling all that, it is back to the film. It's looking at college. It's looking at all these other things that I do a little bit of college scouting throughout the season. But now I'm going to dig into it ahead of the Senior Bowl, ahead of this, the East-West games, ahead of all these other bowl games, and look at these players that are potentially coming out in the NFL draft. And there's a lot of them. So it's quite the process in itself. They're ahead of the combine. So that's just making sure I get my everything kind of understood, who are the guys I want to target, who are the guys I'm looking at, get that kind of that big list underway ahead of the combine. And then the combine comes, you're really cranking out because you want to make sure that when the NFL draft hits, you're hitting as well. So for me, this is where we start to like really get busy. Once I get this playoff charity league kind of set up, we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Then it's right into the draft because that's the next thing for me. And then from the draft, the actual NFL draft itself, and then it's into all these miniature ADP type situations that we're looking at. So really, this is the busiest time I'm going to get. I probably won't get a chance to really breathe until, July maybe. I mean, that's kind of the time. And then July, you're like, okay, I'm going to take a week off, and now I'm going to get ready to go into the 2024 season because now we got to talk about who to draft, when to draft them, what these teams are doing. So, hey, there's no off season when it comes to fantasy football. I mean, for me personally, I think for a lot of the dynasty community, this is when you really focus on getting stuff done, making sure you get all the best players here available, get the best analysis that you could possibly come up with ahead of the draft, ahead of the combine.
This is true. Now I'm looking forward to what you come up with this off season. It's gonna be, it's gonna be a ton of fun because again, you're right. It's there's no off season. You got NFL free agents coming. We don't know where these rookies are gonna land until after the draft, but there's so much excitement. Who are some players? Obviously, it is early in the process, very early. We don't know where people are going to go. We don't know how they're going to turn out on they're at the combine and whatnot. But who are some players you're most excited to see during this process over the next few months, like coming out? Like what players you really keeping an eye on?
A couple. Obviously, we're looking at the big name guys. We want to know about Caleb Williams. We want to know about Drake May. We want to know about Marvin Harrison Jr. That's going to be that first kind of group of people there. There's some good high-end talent. The Keon Colemans, the Jane Daniels. These are these big-name guys, Malik Neighbors. But for me, Tez Walker's a guy that I really want to focus in out of North Carolina. He's a guy I think has good potential to be a big-name fantasy star. He's going to get drafted a little bit later than maybe I would like to see him go, like maybe Emeka Abuka. He's going to get drafted ahead of him. So he's going to be one of those wide receivers that maybe goes down a little bit further in the draft, but could have big-time potential, like a Jaden Reed type potential there, where we're not giving him the respect that he necessarily deserves. So I'm looking forward to watching him step up there. And then I'm kind of interested to see how these other quarterbacks shape out there. What is J.J. McCarthy going to be? He's having a good year in Michigan, but is that going to translate into fantasy? So I got to go dive a little bit deeper into his statistics there from the quarterback position. These running backs, from the running backs that have already kind of announced, it hasn't been a great group that come out yet. So we're waiting on some more names to kind of come out for that to kind of transpire. And we know running backs are devalued as far as fantasy is concerned, as far as the NFL is concerned. And at this point, we kind of almost want – I don't know if we want a whole bunch of running backs coming in because we still have so much uncertainty in the NFL with the running backs in the positions that they're already in. Yeah. So I don't want to really pollute that position that much, but we'll see how it goes. Quarterbacks are the big one right now. Which quarterbacks are coming out? Michael Penix, where's he going to go? He's one of those quarterbacks that could be a top 3 quarterback, but he's also that quarterback that has those injury concerns when it comes to the knees. Where is the NFL going to value him? Because his game speaks high, but those knees are going to be a concern there, those red flags as far as drafters are concerned. So for me, there's all these players. I'm really interested in taking a look at how they break it all down. But for me, we'll see how it all shapes out. Wait for those guys to officially commit to coming out and then go from there.
It's so exciting. I have a couple rebuilds, massive rebuilds in some dynasty leagues. I'm going to do a big startup with our home group. So I'm so excited for this year. It's going to be a ton of fun. I'm a Seattle guy, so UW's my squad that I grew up with. So seeing Penix out there, I mean, he earned some money the other night. Hopefully he comes through against Michigan, plays well. But man, he was lights out the other night on the national scene. So looking for a great pre-draft process for him, and hopefully things turn out because he's a great kid and ultra talented. Hate the injury history and everything, but definitely rooting for him for sure.
Absolutely. I mean, he's one of those guys I think he's going to be the most polarizing probably prospect because of the injuries and the talent, combining the two of them together. And there's going to be a team. All it takes is one team, right? All it takes is one team to be willing to take that shot. And I think there's going to be a team that's willing to take that shot in the first round when it comes to pennies.
Let's go. Now, obviously your journey in the fantasy industry has been fun to witness, from my perspective. Can you name a few people that have just had a huge impact on you along the way?
Yeah, it really, I mean, I wouldn't be anywhere today if it wasn't for Bob Harris. Really, he's brought me in to do a bunch of projects. He gave me my opportunity to get on XM radio more often than not. He's been a pioneer as such. I mean, he brings a lot of lesser known content creators onto the Football Diehard show with him and Mike Dempsey. So many people that have come up around the same time I did, I've seen them on the show. So it's been really fantastic to see that. Howard Bender is another one of those guys that's given me an opportunity on XM radio from time. You actually gave me my first radio appearance there. A good friend there, Emil Cadillac, there gave me my first ever opportunity to have my work published in one of his magazines. And I'll tell you something right now. When you go to the local Walmart, especially here in Canada, so fantasy football in Canada, it's not nearly as big as it is down in the States. We don't have nearly the same selection of magazines, especially where I'm from here out west. So when I was able to go with my kids to the local Walmart, pull up his magazine publication, open it up, and my ugly ass was in there, it hit different. My excitement, my kids' excitement to see me in a magazine, it just hit different. And I mean, I owe a lot to Bob and I owe a lot to Emil for giving me those opportunities to have my work published, because there's a lot of people that do this for a long time that don't necessarily have that same opportunity presented to themselves. So for me, that's definitely one of those things there. I owe them. Obviously, guys like Adam Rank and Scott Fish and these other guys that have been sounding boards for me since I got into the industry. I mean, that's been fantastic. But for me, it's definitely Bob Harris and Cadillac who have been in my corner since day number one.
That's awesome. I think I remember you sharing that story with the magazine and everything. So that's really, really, really cool. Obviously, that kind of ties into what you're doing with this this playoff fantasy league. You want to talk about that and what you're trying to do for Emil?
Yeah, it's recently Emil was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer there, and anyone who doesn't know Emil doesn't know fantasy football's beginnings. Emil was a pioneer in the industry, one of the first trailblazers out there, along with the biggest names in the sports. He's one of those guys that got magazines published and printing publications out there. And I think Bob Harris has been working with him hand in hand for the last 30 years. So when the news came about him going through chemotherapy over the last few years here, or last year, because of that pancreatic cancer, I know how important Emil's family is to him, because I did have him on the Behind the Guardian podcast. We talked about that family and how important it is, and to make sure that his family is taken care of at all costs and whatnot. So I had to figure out to do something. And every year we do a charity league. And this year I was actually going to pump the brakes on the playoff league. I did the regular season one, but I was like, oh man, it's so much work. I don't want to do it. But when that news came up, I'm like, this is obvious. I mean, this is something that needs to be done. And I know the fantasy football community will rally behind something like this in support of one of its own. So we went out there and we got it going. And I think I started this process on Tuesday, maybe Monday. We're up to 40 people right now, which means we've raised over $1,000 as we stand right now. Obviously, I have room in this league to go 150 if we have to. Like, I got as many people as we can get in here. Go to @MattDonnellyFF on the X or on the Twitter, or whatever you're calling it these days. It's pinned right there. It's the first tweet you're going to find. It's got the sign up. It's got the league safe information. Every dollar is going directly to Emil and his family from this raising. We've got some great prizes right now. I talk about how this community just kind of rallies behind something. And again, they're doing it. We've got some fantastic prizes. Give me 2 seconds to kind of pull up what we got going on here. First place is going to be a champ chain there, courtesy of Kelly Singh there and Trophy Smack. And you're going to get an SFB 14 invite right there, courtesy of Scott Fish. So right there, boom, ticket is punched to the Scott Fish Bowl. Joe Bryant there at Fantasy Guys. He's already donated a Hall of Fame premium subscription there. Reception Perception and Matt Harmon have come through with another premium subscription. Fantasy Points, you're going to get a subscription there, courtesy of Joe Dolan. FantasyGuru.com and Jeff Mans, they're contributing into the prizes. Fantasy Alarm, Howard Bender, Rotoballer, they're going to donate some prizes as well. I'm just kind of going through what I have here. Joe Cox, CBS Sports, subscription to your favorite team site on 247 Sports. That's coming up there. The FF Ghost, you all know him. You all love him from his Orange Report. We got some Orange Reports we're going to be handing out there as well. IDP guy subscription courtesy of Ricky Rodriguez there and Nate Cheatham. Lots of prizes available right now. I mean, we got 40 people signed up. There's like 10 prizes. There's a 1 in 4 chance right now you're walking away with some kind of subscription. So we need to kind of bring that number down there a little bit to get some more people involved here, because the more people that get involved, the better off, the more the donation is going to go to Amel and his family right now. And it's really simple. It's a one and done type format there. Starting lineup is 8 starters, 1 quarterback, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, a tight end, and a flex, non-quarterback flex there. And it's one and done. So if you use a player, he's done for the playoffs. So the team gets eliminated, he's done for the playoffs too. So it really changes everything, a little bit of strategy involved in it. And it's only 4 weeks, and it goes to a great cause, right? So $25, that's the donation amount there. If you have issues there with donating on League Save, donate it right to Emel's GoFundMe page. Just take a screenshot, send it to me, and we'll get you in the league that way as well. So there's definitely a couple different ways in which you can make your donation to get involved in this.
Wonderful cause. Yeah, absolutely cool what you're doing there. Looking forward to that league growing and being able to give more to Emil and his family. So great stuff there. Glad you're doing that. Love to help spread the word for that for sure. Now, obviously, you've seen a lot when it comes to the fantasy industry. You've had your own journey when it comes to creating content and getting out there. You've interviewed a ton of people on this exact same subject. What kind of advice do you have for aspiring analysts, people who want to get more involved in the fantasy sports industry?
We talked about this a little bit at the top of the show there. It's just do it. If you have a desire to produce fantasy content, if you have a desire to produce NFL content, start doing it. Get into the community the best you can right now and just get that information out there. There's all kinds of different organizations right now that would love to have your work on their website. I remember seeing someone just recently put out there, hey, I'm looking to do some writing in about 8 different companies. Boom, boom, boom. Hey, drop us a DM. Hey, do this. There's people looking for you right now. You don't know what you're ready to write yet, but there's people looking to have your work on their website. I mean, that's how good this community is right now, where if you have a thought about doing it, they will help you get out there and get it done. Some of it's paid, some of it's not paid. And that's a different topic for another day altogether about paid content versus not paid content. But if you are wanting to get into this industry, if you're wanting to get content creating, do it. It really is. It's not as hard as it sounds. Lots of people have already gone out there and done it and had success doing it. If you need some help, slide into my DMs. I'll be more than happy to kind of point you in the right direction.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, Matt, is there anything that we haven't covered that you want to share before we close things out?
No, I mean, my biggest thing right now is just making sure that Amel and his family are taken care of right now, the best that we could do that. And I think the community has the ability to definitely have a large hand in all of that.
Great stuff for sure. Tell the listeners, viewers, where they can find your work.
You can catch us on the Vipers Network on the YouTube channel. Be ready for Behind the Grind Season 4 to kick off here. Some great guests already lined up that way. I'm doing some short videos there over at Rotoballer, so you can obviously catch that content as well.
Well, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on here, and I can't wait to see what's next for you this off season, which is not an off season, and obviously in 2024, my friend.
All right, looking forward to it. Hey, onward and upward.
Let's go.
Thank you for listening to the Fantasy Football Unlimited podcast. Until next time, be sure to follow and subscribe to all of FFU's social media accounts for daily content.